What is up, everyone? Thank you for joining me here in the Belfry. In our previous few episodes, we've been looking at how the incarnation gives us some insight into the nature of God and how we as individuals or as his set-apart society are meant to relate with him or them. What I want to do today is talk about how the incarnation helps us to understand something that had been previously mostly speculated about, mostly assumed by the ancients. But Jesus brought a concept more into clarity, and this concept is hell. If you ask anyone about hell, you're probably going to get something about fire, something about judgment, something about the wicked. However, if you go to Psalm chapter 88, you're going to find something a little different. This is our controversial passage of the day. It's written by a man named Heman the Ezrahite.
By the power of Grayskull.
Heman the Ezrahite, who is in a desperate place and is asking Yahweh to save him from death. This is verses 9 through 12. I call to you, Lord, every day. I spread out my hands to you. Do you show your wonders to the dead? Do their spirits rise up and praise you? Is your love declared in the grave, your faithfulness in destruction? Are your wonders known in the place of darkness, or your righteous deeds in the land of oblivion? Obviously, this man is assuming the answer to all of these questions. These are rhetorical questions. He's basically saying, if I die, and of course this is a psalmist, right? A Bible writer. He's a righteous person. If I die, I will be cut off from your wonders. I will not experience your love and faithfulness. I will not be able to sing your praises. And he describes this place as the land of oblivion, as a place of darkness, as destruction. His afterlife, a righteous person, is assumed to be a place of darkness and death. And we get this same sense if you read through Genesis. It talks about going to rest with your fathers. You know, in Isaiah 14, it talks about this king that has to lie aside the commoners. You know, it's the great leveling place. In Israel, it was called Sheol, but in all the cultures of the ancient times, it was this underworld, this common grave for the dead. And of course, this seems to disagree with what we find in the New Testament, where Paul says to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Or John saying that around the throne of God, we have all the saints and all the angels worshiping God for all eternity. How could we be doing that if the psalmist says that the dead cannot rise up and worship? In the two different testaments, it seems that we have two different ways of thinking about the afterlife, as if the Bible's disagreeing with itself. It's important to approach the Bible in context of real people in real places, in real time periods. And sometimes what God does is he meets people where they are and then gradually moves them to where he wants them to be. It's not just always coming in with these transcendent truths that always agree with each other. I love the way this church father in the late 4th century, his name was Gregory of Nazianzus. This is how he describes this process. He partly removes and partly condones ancestral habits, conceding some little of what tended to pleasure, just as medical men do with their patients, that their medicine may be taken, being artfully blended with what is nice. All right, that's basically an old-style way of saying,
for a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down.
What God does is he gives them something familiar, something that they like, and he meets them in that space, and then will move them toward more and more clarity. He allows them to believe this concept of an underworld existence. In fact, we see in the parables where Jesus talks about the rich man and Lazarus, right? You probably know this parable. Rich man and Lazarus. The rich man oppresses this poor man named Lazarus, but when they die, they find themselves in opposite spectrums. The poor man that was oppressed is now in Abraham's bosom. In other words, he's resting with the good guys. And then the rich man finds himself in this place of torment, this place where he can't even get a drink of water.
Welcome to hell.
They're in an underworld, and there's this gap between them. So instead of the idea from Psalm 88 where everyone's on the same field, they're all lying down together, we have this gap between the righteous and the unrighteous. It kind of makes sense that people would start to think, with our inherent sense of justice, that a murderer and a doctor shouldn't be sharing the same space in the afterlife, especially if there's some sense of consciousness, which was always believed to be the case. And so what we ended up with is this idea of levels of the underworld. The most righteous would be in the upper levels, where they could maybe at times even help the living. You get this idea from in ancestor worship, Mulan, right? Where they're praying to their ancestors and their ancestors can come back and help them. But the farther down you were, the less you could help out, the deeper and darker things would get. And that just made sense of this idea of justice in the afterlife. You even find in the Book of the Dead, the Egyptians had this creature named the Amit. It was a hippo, crocodile, lion monster that would eat a human heart if it was found too heavy compared to the feather of truth on a scale. The Egyptians had this sense that in the afterlife, it should matter what happened in your actual life. You'll find that in the intertestamental period, that there was not only this idea of gradations in hell or in Sheol, basically the underworld, but that they were moving up into this idea of separation between heaven and the underworld, or heaven and what was later called Gehenna. And this is the term that Jesus was using to describe hell. It was the word translated as hell in the New Testament. So Gehenna, also known as Gehinnom, was the Valley of Hinnom. Valley of Hinnom was right outside the walls of Jerusalem. It was a place that had been cursed because the ancient kings of Judah used to sneak out at night and sacrifice their children to a Canaanite god named Molech. Once they started doing that, that place was a cursed valley and they couldn't use it for anything. So what they would do is they'd throw their trash in there, anything that didn't belong inside the walls of Jerusalem, God's holy city. And also, if sinners were executed outside the city gates, the wicked were being judged, the garbage was being burned. It was a place that was perpetually on fire, and it was a place that belonged outside the city. This idea that kind of resonated with being cast out of Eden, or, the sheep and the goats being cast out into this place of death and judgment. When Jesus talks about Gehenna, in Matthew 25, when he talks about the sheep and the goats, he describes it as a place prepared for the devil and his angels. And that gives us some insight into what he thinks of when he's talking about this Gehinnom, this place that was an actual place. I mean, if Jesus said, go to hell to his people, they could literally turn and look and see the smoke and literally walk to hell, to Gehenna, to Gehinnom, this place of constant burning, where outside the walls of Jerusalem, outside of God's presence. And so it only makes sense that that concept was there. But what did Jesus mean by the concept? Clearly, he didn't believe that that garbage dump was actually hell, but it symbolized what hell was. Jesus said Gehenna was prepared for the devil and his angels. So in my mind, this is a spiritual prison for spiritual beings. At this time, heaven was a place where the angels are all there with God in his presence, but there's this rebellion there. And so it says that this place had to be prepared for the rebel angels to go. That's why I think of it as a spiritual prison, because it's prepared for the devil and his angels. It's prepared for spirits. I don't understand spirit prisons. I have no idea what that's supposed to mean. But what you get, the implication is this is a place for rebels to be. So at the end of the world, when God separates the sheep from the goats and he casts the devil into this lake of fire, into this place of destruction, this Gehinnom, all the ones who follow Satan, that are devoted to Satan, that have taken on his mark, so to speak, are cast in there with him. So this idea of hell being a place that is spiritual in nature, like a prison for rebellious spirits, and that anyone who's committed to those rebellious spirits would go there with them, and that anyone that's committed to the good spirits, to God and his angels, would go where he is in the afterlife. These places, heaven and hell, were not prepared for humans. They're spiritual places for spiritual beings, yet it becomes this natural consequence, almost a momentum from our current lives into those places. And so what I want to do next week is talk about, all right, let's say this place, Gehenna, are for those who are estranged from God. They don't belong to God. They end up here with the devil and his angels. Are those people allowed to, let's say they learn their lesson? Are they allowed to leave after a certain amount of time? The Universalists believe that some people go to hell, yes, but then they can learn when Jesus preaches to the souls in hell that he's giving them an opportunity to change. Is that true or not true? What about verses that seem to suggest that that place is a place of destruction for souls? Maybe God doesn't torment people for all eternity, but maybe he puts them in this place so that they can be essentially removed from the equation, destroyed. These are all things that I want to talk about next week. I hope you join me then. I hope that you have ideas and thoughts about this place called Gehinnom. If you do, leave your comments below. Join me again in the belfry.
And the masters of the universe.